Welcome to a new episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. I am Steve Wyss and I'm with Jonathan Fadugba. And it's a roasting August here in the UK at the moment. Even got close to 30 degrees in Yorkshire this week, Jonathan. So you must be even hotter down south. How you doing, my man?
Hi, Steve. Hi, everyone. I'm actually up north at the moment, so it's not as I'm more north than you. I'm up in Liverpool, so it's not as nice weather-wise, but it's still nice. Very, very sunny. I was down south last week, and that was extraordinarily sunny. But yeah, I'm back up north. We're enjoying some seasonal weather, aren't we? For a change. Sadly, not been the best of times for me. Personal issues behind the scenes, so won't go into them too much. But I wouldn't say I'm in the greatest of spirits lately, and obviously I want to apologize to the listeners because I feel like I've been through the ringer the last year or so in terms of podcasts. Like it seems to be one thing after another, so I do apologize to the listeners maybe for some absence at periods, but I've had a family matter to deal with, which has led to me being away for a few weeks, and obviously still of course working on my MBA final project. So I've got a few weeks left of that, a few months left of that before I conclude and finally get my MBA. How are you, Steve?
Well, it's good to have you. Good to do an episode with you, Jonathan. It's been that sort of year, hasn't it? I had my issues at times, and I know you've been very busy up there in Liverpool with the NBA. So I'm doing all right. You know, it gets busy now for me. I was just saying to you off air, August is a crazy month for me. Football starts everywhere, and you know, I suddenly become in demand on random things and everything. So, but yeah, yes, I'm enjoying the football. We're going to talk about the European qualifiers soon. It is one of my favourite times of the year for that. I think sometimes it's actually better than the league phases of these tournaments. And of course, we're going to get a brand new format now for Champions League and Europa League. We'll have to wait and see how good that's going to be, but the qualifiers haven't changed, and it's been an exciting time that way. So I'm doing okay, but this is always a bit of a challenging month for me, I must say.
Yeah, you're always a man in demand at this time of the year. I know you've got various fingers in various pies, as they might say. Let's start with the European qualifiers, because we do have games by the time this is released. You know, we might even be mid some of the games, or just about to start some of them. We're at a key point of the season in terms of European qualification for teams in Norway and Sweden. Steve, let's have just a quick recap of the last round. And you might even want to talk about previous ties, because we haven't talked too much about Europe in recent weeks. So I'll just read through some of the relevant results from the last week or so, the last rounds, etc. We've had Malmo 2, this is the 6th of August last week, basically. So as we head into the second leg of these games, Malmo drew 2-2 with PAOK of Greece. This is Tuesday, 6th of August. We also had Buda Glimt going 1-0 up away from home to Jagiellonia Bialystok. That is in Champions League qualifying. Prior to that, Steve, Malmo overcame Klaksvik narrowly. They actually lost the second leg of that 3-2. You may have caught that. I know you're a man who has your eye across a lot of these leagues and games. And also we had Buda Glimt did pretty well when they dispatched RFS, who are from Latvia. They beat them 4-0 in one of the legs, and then absolutely sort of dispatched them in the return as well, 3-1. So doing pretty well. Midtjylland in Denmark, not necessarily we cover a huge amount of detail, but we do have around it when it comes to Europe. Steve, what is your impression of the opening legs for the most recent qualifiers, as I just mentioned there, and also just in terms of Glimt and Malmo in general, how they're doing in the Champions League?
Well, for the Champions League, I think it'd be nice to get one of these teams in the new group stage. It'd be great for the podcast, wasn't it? It's been a while. I think Malmo were the last team that got into the UCL. I think for Buda Glimt now, what you've got to remember, the Norwegian coefficient is a lot better than the Allsvenskans. In fact, you know, if Norway had a good season, they might even get into a position where they could get 2 Champions League spots eventually. But it would take some really good progress from Glimt to Molde or anyone else that went deep. Glimt got through the previous tie really easily. And an interesting draw here against the Polish champions. The Polish league, I have to say, is the most bonkers league in recent years. Hagliona Bialystok. I've absolutely butchered that name. I'm terrible with pronunciations there. But I did watch a bit of them the previous round, the Polish side. They're a bit of a batshit mental sort of side, wide open a bit. And I think Glimt showed their experience in the first leg over in Poland there, beat them 1-0. There were some chances at both ends, but in the end, they shut the game down really well. And that's a good win there. I mean, I just can't imagine the Polish side going to the Arctic Circle and turning that around. That'd be a fantastic achievement for them if they could. But I think Glimt have just got the experience in Europe and they should get through. They would love to finally make the group stage. And to do it, they have to get past Red Star Belgrade, which would be a very tough game. But I think it's one that they could potentially prevail in. Malmo have given a much better account of themselves so far. Klaksvik's not an easy tie. We know Hacken got knocked out by them last year. And they're facing the Greek champions, PAOK. And they should have won the first leg, really. 2-1 up. I think they should have got the advantage, really. If you look at the metrics, if you look at how the match was played, PAOK, I think, will be very, very happy to go away there with a draw. And now it's all on the line, against, as they go to Greece. It's a really tough place to go, that stadium. And have Malmo got enough? It's probably the best version of Malmo for a while, isn't it? And they're really well managed, but they are odds on to be knocked out now, unfortunately.
Yeah, we will talk about Malmo and Glimt respectively in parts 1 and 2. We will start with Sweden and then we'll head on to Norway later on in the show. So do stay tuned in terms of domestic action. Glimt, it was an own goal, in fact, by Adrian Diguez. So to put them 1-0 up, they will, as you say, have a home game to seal that tie and progress to the next round. In Malmo's case, goals from Pontus Jansson and Sebastian Nanasi, who we will talk a little bit about maybe in the Swedish section, but goals from Tyson and Abdul Rahman Baba, formerly of Chelsea, Ghanaian man there, put PAOK in the 2-2 and they take the tie to Greece. Steve, just very briefly, predictions for these two games. Who do you think is going through?
I think Glimt will go through. I'm not necessarily saying they're going to win the second leg, but I think they will win it. 2-1 feels about right. And the Malmo game, I've got a feeling that we could get an upset and we could get a draw in 90 minutes, which means away goals don't count now, of course. So we could go all the way extra time and penalties. I'm not even going to predict penalties, but I'm going to go draw in 90 minutes. And then after that, the winner, by the way, of that tie would face Sparta Prague or FCSB, which is, I think, effectively Steaua Bucharest, the Romanian side. That would be a winnable but tough tie.
Yeah, I think PAOK will be slight favourites, won't they, to beat Malmo in this one? But massive game for Malmo. They've been a bit wobbly recently. On their day, they're very, very good. They've also lost players, haven't they, recent weeks? They've lost, for example, their centre back, who we'll talk about, as I say, in the domestic side of the show. But plenty to talk about in Malmo. We wish both sides luck. Steve, we then have Europa League and Conference League qualification to dissect with you. So if we look at the Europa League, most recent round of results, we had Rijeka 1, Elfsborg 1. That was a tie, obviously, for the Swedish side there, getting a draw away from home. We also had Molde 3, Cercle Bruges 0. Big result there for Molde to sort of win that one. So second leg of those games are coming up this Thursday. Steve, what were your perspectives on that before we sort of talk about Conference League as well? And there's some big clubs in this Europa League qualifiers, by the way, as well. Braga in there. There's quite a few big teams. What were your perspectives on these two games?
I thought it was Molde's best performance of the season in the first half against Cercle Bruges. Dominated them, and it was a really good display. They've been pretty inconsistent this year, Molde, even in the previous round against Silkeborg. Silkeborg are an interesting side, by the way, Danish side. I've got my eye on them this year. They look an interesting watch. The second half, Cercle Bruges missed some 2-3 really big chances, and I think they should have got a goal. I think 3-0. I think Molde will lose the second leg from what I saw there, but I think they'll have enough to go through. And actually, the winners of these two ties face each other. We could get Molde or Elfsborg for a spot in the Europa League. But the most important thing for both sides is to get through, because if you get through, you're guaranteed a spot in at least the Conference League. And I think really both sides would probably accept that. Certainly Elfsborg surely would be very happy with a spot in the Conference League league stage. I've been really impressed by them, Elfsborg. Under their new manager they've brought in since Jimmy Tellin left. He looks the part. I forgot his name, but he looks the part. He has this white shirt on every game. A bit of a hunk. I'm sure he's quite popular with the ladies and the lads, actually, depending. But look, they got past Sheriff Tiraspol in the previous round, who, down the years, a decent side, tough place to go. And then they dug out a great 1-1 draw against Rijeka last week, down to 10 men for most of the second half, but managed to dig in and grind. And Rijeka are not an easy team, but that's a genuine 50-50 tie. But I think Elfsborg now with home advantage will be looking to try and get themselves a guaranteed spot in the Conference League. And they're a team that I've been highly impressed with, mate.
Yeah, and we'll talk about for any Scottish listeners. We could have had a Scottish treble in Europe, but unfortunately, for those of that persuasion, Kilmarnock were knocked out by, of course, Cercle Bruges in the previous round. So we could have had them involved with the other two, of course, who we'll talk about shortly, the Scottish teams. But Elfsborg saw off Sheriff in the last round, and as you mentioned, Silkeborg succumbed to Molde there. As I mentioned, you got teams like Ajax at this stage as well, a few other sort of big sides. So yeah, not too easy to get through unless you maybe get luck of the draw a little bit there. Klaksvik as well, I have to give a shout out to them. They're still involved in it, although they did win their first leg of that tie as well. So yeah, interesting stuff. By the way, for those wondering, I think you're referring to Oscar Hildmark there, Steve, the 32-year-old.
That's him. Very young.
Yeah, very young manager. A bit of as you say there, someone maybe you've got aesthetically pleasing you there, Steve.
Reminds me a little bit of Hervé Renard. Hervé Renard, a younger version of Hervé Renard.
I'm not sure about that. That is some swag. Hervé Renard swag is. I'll have to have interviewed it. I've met him and interviewed that man, and he is a charmer. But we will talk about Elfsborg, obviously, in the Swedish section as well, because there's a few things to say about them. Turned their season around pretty well since the new management's gone in, and obviously Jimmy Tellin. I have to give a bit of a shout out there in terms of Scotland. He made his sort of league debut, didn't he, this week, Steve, as the manager there, and they had a tifo with a sort of Swedish banner and a few things. So the fans are excited there, and he started pretty well. But we will, as I say, we'll talk about Elfsborg shortly. Predictions for these two ties, Steve. It sounds like you think both will get through.
I do. I think Molde will lose a second leg, but I think they go through. And do you know what? I think Elfsborg progress. I really do. And I think they win in 90 minutes as well. Be a tough tie. Rijeka are not a bad city team at all. They're probably the second best team from their nation, Dinamo Zagreb. We know how strong they are, usually qualify for the Champions League. But I think Elfsborg can scrape through.
Yeah, they did finish second in their domestic league last year, Rijeka in Croatia. So let's see how those games go. Conference League, Steve, before we move on, we've got a few teams there as well, and this is where the Scottish connection comes in. So get your best Scottish, get your kilt on. In the previous round that we've just had, run through the results because there's a lot of them. We've had there's a lot here. Well, let me just scroll through the masses of games that took place in the most recent games. So Tuesday, 6th of August to Thursday, obviously 8th of August last week. We had FC Copenhagen, for those who maybe follow Danish football. They put off a 1-0 win against Banik Ostrava. BK Häcken, 6-1 winners against Pied Linamiskond, and they are from Estonia. 6-1 win there for Häcken. Massive destruction of them. Steve, we then had Ilves 1, Djurgården 1. So Djurgården will go home against the Finnish side, who have maybe one of the best badges in world football. I don't know if you've seen him. Ilves club crest is a bit of an interesting one. Silkeborg obviously made it through, and they playing Ghent. Brøndby also as well. They lost at home to Legia Warsaw. But in terms of our leagues, Steve, Kilmarnock, that's where the Scottish connection comes in. 2-2 against Tromsø. That would have been a hell of an exciting game to be at, maybe potentially. I've been to Kilmarnock Stadium. And also St Mirren against Brann. So the Scottish double there. Steve, what are your perspectives on these games? Obviously, 2 ties there for the two teams, and a destruction for BK Häcken, along with Diff getting a draw, as I just mentioned.
Well, the Scottish matches, I think probably there were 2 late equalisers, one for Kilmarnock, one for St Mirren. Brann dominated St Mirren. I've got to be honest. I thought they'll be very disappointed to only get a draw. St Mirren hardly had a chance really in the game, and I would imagine Brann should see them off quite convincingly in the second leg at home. And Tromsø Kilmarnock was a bit of a topsy-turvy game, probably a fair sort of draw. Kilmarnock do look a better side to me than St Mirren, got to be honest. from what I've seen. Can Tromsø beat them at home? They are the favourites. It's a tough, again, it's not an easy place to go, is it? And Tromsø, not having a great year domestically, I think will be kind of looking forward to progressing. The winners, by the way, of that tie, I think they've got quite a tough one. Yeah, it looks like it'll be probably FC Copenhagen would await the winner of that. So tough to find a route to the Europa League. As for Häcken have now scored 20 goals in their last 4 games, competitive games.
Sorry, you mean including Conference League, you mean?
Yes, no, including the Allsvenskan as well. But the last, they've scored 6 goals in each of the last 3 conference.
No, sorry, I mean you said that it's a tough route for them to the Europa League, but I think you meant Conference League. Just to
sorry, yeah, Conference League, yeah, tough route to the Conference League groups for Tromsø or Kilmarnock there. But you never know, do you? Got to be in it to win it. Häcken have been brilliant. They're just scoring goals for fun at the minute, and I mean they've faced a team from Luxembourg and a team from Estonia. But you got to beat what's in front of you. They're relentless. They don't seem bothered about just easing off. But I think I'm really, really looking forward to the next round because they will face, I think we can assume they're through. If Pied turn that one around, then I'll eat my hat. But Heidenheim of Germany await. Heidenheim, of course, a very interesting side from the Bundesliga who have come up like 5 divisions in the last 10 years or whatever. I think Heidenheim are going to really, really struggle this year. And I think Häcken could beat them. I think we could get a giant killing. We could see a Swedish side beat a Bundesliga side over 2 legs, which would be quite a remarkable achievement, wouldn't it? So I'm very excited about that. And Djurgården against Ilves. I've not seen this Ilves badge. I didn't think Djurgården were very good. I've actually thought Ilves should have beaten them. But I think Djurgården are the sort of team who just get the job done, and the second leg. And I will come up. I need to find out who. I think the winner faces, Maribor or Vojvodina, who I did actually watch that game last week as well. I watch all sorts of games in these qualifiers, and I don't think either are that great. So good chance for Djurgården to get through to the conference.
Yeah, goals from Aman Romeo 2, Amal Luyini 2, Inusa and Egbonifo in that Estonia win. Like you said, it's safe to assume they're probably through unless we do see an almighty turnaround from the Estonians. 5 goals to make up there. That could be a huge game. So that could be an interesting one to keep an eye on. As you mentioned, you haven't seen the Ilves badge. For anyone who has ever seen the Partick Thistle mascot, Kingsley, do you know that big bright yellow mascot that caused a big stir some years back?
I'm just looking
with his angry
now.
face.
Oh,
wow! If you've seen him, you might recognize him in the Ilves badge.
What is this?
Because I'll leave you to Google it for those who haven't. But of course, there's a bit of a similarity there. And that Ilves badge is basically an angry wolf, is how I describe it. I think
this is like something from the House of Horrors.
I'm sure there's a description and sort of a validated description for it and an explanation. But yeah, angry wolf is the way I look at it. Steve. Sounds like you've already kind of made your predictions for this one, so I won't trouble you too much. It sounds like you think that Diff will just about make it, and it sounds like the Scottish teams. Where do you see those? Both sides, by the way, at home. Kilmarnock drew 2-2. Romsas got 2 for Tromsø in that game. Carversell and Wales were the goal scorers. Bobby Wales with a last-minute goal in that one, and for the Brann match. St Mirren, who have actually, from what I've heard, they're quite highly rated this season in terms of some of their recruitment. But it sounds like they, weren't too impressive for you on the day. Myra got the goal for Brann after they had gone 1-0 up, and again it was a 90th minute equaliser from St Mirren, Toyusi Olasanya. So, predictions for these 2 games, Steve? Are we going to have a Scottish double or is it a Norwegian double?
I think there's more chance of a Norwegian double. Brann should see off St Mirren. I think Brann are just a very good side, by the way. I mean, they just beat Eredivisie opposition in the previous round and Go Ahead Eagles. And they just look at, for me, St Mirren maybe are rated domestically, but I just think Brann are very strong. Kilmarnock, I think they've got a chance. Yeah, it looked quite an even game. Tromsø, it's not their greatest year. So I think Killy could go up there and give themselves an opportunity. But, home advantage is important. So I'm going to give Tromsø the edge. I do think Djurgården will see off Ilves. Interesting history here, the Ilves. I think they used to be linked with Tampere United a club that actually won the Vikasliga 3 times, I do believe, and then had some very dodgy financial dealings, which sent them down a few leagues. And then, yes, Häcken will see off paid, no doubt. But looking forward to that match against Heidenheim.
And we do have a question from FPL Shelby at Shelby FPL. Steve, you've kind of touched on it already. So in a word, I want your answer or in the sentence. He says, she says, Norwegian teams showing in Europe the quality and evolution of their football. Is it finally time for Buda?
Oh, yes. Yes, I think it is. Yeah, I do. I think they can go to, well, they've got to see off this Polish side first. I think they should, and then go to Red Star Belgrade. And, they need to learn on their experiences that they've had in Europe and finally get over. They had a very similar tie against Zagreb, if you remember, 2-3 years ago. Got knocked out in extra time. If they can learn the advantages of that, the lessons of that, and play to their strengths and advantages, then they can do it. It feels like it's their moment. I feel like Buda Glimt, this is their number one ambition, number one focus to get to the Champions League group stages. They want to do it for ages.
Imagine if they did it. That would be a humongous achievement, wouldn't it?
Massive. I think it's not a bad draw, is it? I mean, it's not. Look, nothing's an easy draw in the final playoff round if they were to get that to that stage. But I think that it could have been tougher if you look at some of the other teams around. So, Red Star, the sort of side that always in a group stage, aren't they? Like bottom of their group with like 1 point or something, or a random win. It's different now. Everyone's going to play 8 games. 8 games in Champions League now. So if you can get through to this new group stage, that's a massive. You're going to get about over 10 million just for making it, and then what prize money is 2-3 million per win now. So it could really, really pay off for them. There's going to be a lot of pressure on these playoff games, mate, when they come around for everyone.
Fantastic stuff. Catch them all this week. Häcken actually playing tomorrow, even though it's a Conference League. On the Tuesday, and then games between Tuesday and Thursday. Keep an eye on schedules for more information. Steve, let's crack on.
Allsvenskan.
Sweden. Yeah, I'm going to pass the baton in Olympic fashion to you now.
Was there any baton drops in the Olympics? I didn't really watch. There must have been a mishap somewhere. It always amuses me when it happens, especially in the swimming pool or something.
Well, the American women nearly lapped half the crowd in the 4x4. That was an interesting one. They were so good, but I didn't think I saw any baton drops. I saw a few people pulling out, falling over.
How many medals are in swimming, by the way? Do you think there's an absurd amount of medals in swimming?
You're asking the wrong guy here. My swimming. This is not the Nordics swimming.
I picked up the wrong sport. I picked up the wrong sport, I think. But anyway, moving on to. I can't believe the Allsvenskan, mate. It's 18 rounds old. There was only 12 games left. When did that happen? We're really closing in on the final stretch, and we've got a league table which is interesting. Malmo 41 points, Djurgården on 35, but do have a game in hand. Hammarby on 32 points. Then no one else is above 29, so it's pretty much a 2-horse race for the title, possibly 3. Just going to run through some results from the weekend. A crazy 3-3 draw on Monday evening. Hammarby against Bromma-Poikina. Eikor 1, Mjällby 0. Elfsborg are beating Gais 2-1. Sirius 3, Kalmar 1. Kalmar in a bit of trouble. I might just touch on that at some point here in this episode. Malmö with a 1-0 win at Halmstad. IFK Göteborg 0, Värnamo 0. IFK still can't get a home win under their new manager. Norrköping 2, Västerås 1. The luckless Västerås, who just find ways to not score goals and not get points. But a lot been going on in Allsvenskan since we were last talking there. A lot of transfers as well. I think transfers might be a place to start here, actually, because there's some big defenders that have left the league. Jonathan, one that really caught my eye recently was Derek Cornelius to Marseille, one of my teams there in France. 4 million. Looked like a good piece of business from Marseille for me. What do you think of that one?
Well, he's had a good year or so in Sweden. He's not been there long, the Canadian. He was away for the Copa America for a bit, and this season's been a bit stop-start for him, really. But he's sort of stepped out of the shadows, maybe of Busanello, I think, who maybe overshadowed him in that defense. Pontus Jansson as well, of course, the returning hero of the side of Malmo. But Cornelius has sort of stepped up this year and got a few goals from set pieces and things like that, and started to really show his ability enough to attract interest from other clubs. I think it's a bit of a loss for Malmo. They have stepped in quickly to replace him with Colin Rossler, who we'll talk about shortly. There was a bit of a brouhaha about that transfer, by the way. Malmo moving to sign him from Mjällby. Obviously, his dad was previously Malmo's manager, you might recall, some years back. So maybe a little bit of family link there. He moved to Malmo. But yeah, I think it's a loss for Malmo to lose Cornelius. He's a solid defender, just very strong, physical. You only have to sort of take one look at him to see the size of him. He's a beastly man, and good at set pieces, as I say, good at the air, good aerially, good, strong physical player, and also as a left-sided centre back, someone who is going to be in demand, I suppose. So fair play to him. Obviously, he gets his move. Steve, while we're on the subject of the Olympics, of course, there was a bit of in the way that Cornelius leaps over defenders, there was a world record from Sweden. Armand Duplantis breaking the world record for the pole vault, winning gold for Sweden. So I just should have started with that, really.
He's incredible. He's like the best ever at pole vault, isn't he? Like, of all
world
time.
Record holder, yeah. That is generally what the world record means. But yeah, he's pretty good. So I just have to give a shout out there to Sweden for that gold medal. But I should have probably started the section with that and then gone on to Cornelius. But anyway, I've done it the way around. But you can see why I'm not the host.
I'm just looking at some of these dealings here. I think some teams have come in and snapped up some great bits of value, actually. Roma have got Samuel Dahl from Djurgården, 4 million. Trenskow, who's had a great year for Kalmar. Here have been only paying 1.5 million euros for him. So
less, I think, from the rumor.
Less than that. It looks like it's sort of the bargain area here at the minute. Allsvenskan. Some of these teams across Europe picking apart the teams, and there's plenty of rumors still. This transfer window is still ongoing in Scandinavia now, up until the end of the month. So there's going to be lots of ins and outs, I think, until then. Nanasi, how is he still at Malmo? Feels like the last 3 or 4 windows we've been talking about his potential departure. So it's all, there's loads of the rumor mill out there. We've had some deals done. What's caught your eye, Jonathan, and what potentially big moves could happen still?
Well, there's also been a few sort of inter-nation transfers that could be interesting to keep an eye on. I think Marcus Rafferty's gone to Ålesund in, I think, the second division of Norway. That's in it. I think he could be one to keep an eye on. I quite like him as a 19-year-old. It'd be interesting to see how he does in Norway. We've had others sort of moving between the two leagues as well, whether it's on loan or permanent deals. I like, as I mentioned there, Cornelius. I think that is a good move. For Malmo getting some money in, of course, but also a bit of a blow in terms of their title ambitions. Viktor Jukanovic is a big blow, I think, leaving Hammarby to Standard Liège. I think it's like a loan with an option to buy or something sort of convoluted along those lines. But I think he's a bit of a loss. But I never understood why he didn't get a huge amount of game time. Strange one, really. There was big high hopes for him, really. But this season he's sort of been in and out of the side. One player, Steve, that I think might have caught your eye, former French league player from Valenciennes, Steve. I know you might have remembered them back in the day. David Kruse, gone to IFK Göteborg, central midfielder. He's someone they're pinning their hopes on to maybe get them out of that just sort of mini relegation struggles they're having. Not that they go down, but I think, potentially they're in a little bit of spot of bother there still. IFK, they're not out of it. Samuel Dahl, I think, we did talk about him on the last podcast about the fact that he could be on the move. That deal has now been done. I think it's a good piece of business, not only for Djurgården, but also Roma. I think Roma have got themselves a sort of cheap left back at 4.3 million euros. Affordable anyway. I wouldn't say cheap, but it's affordable for his age. 21, Swedish international. But also Djurgården have made a tidy profit there because they picked him up. I think it's only just over a year ago, roughly. So to sort of sign him from Örebro and then flip him more or less in less than 2 years, about 18 months roughly, is a really good piece of business for them. Djurgården seem to be quite good at that at the moment. They've gone into the market and replaced some of their outgoings. They've brought in Victor Berg from Värnamo, and they've also brought in Adam Stoll from Mjölby. So they are picking up a lot of players at the moment. Djurgården, it seems to be the domestic market is an area they're looking at, and like I say, that's a good flip. Apart from that, we're still, as you say, in the middle of the window, Steve, and it seems that every day there's deals going on. But I do quite like the signing, I don't like it actually. Sorry, I don't like the departure of Jakob Transko for Kalmar. I think that's a hammer blow. We're going to talk about them in a minute. So I won't go into too much detail, but
they've not got anywhere near enough, have they?
I think that's a massive loss for them. I know it's 1.5 million euros once bonuses are added, but I think the initial fee is about 1.1 million. And the other one maybe that is just an interesting piece of business. Filip Siglev, the goalkeeper at Brno Poikin, has gone to Greece. There's a lot of talk that he might go elsewhere. So maybe not gone to such a big league as maybe some might have imagined. The 19-year-old goalkeeper, he's very talented, sort of young keeper last season, especially in his breakout year. Everyone was talking about him, but he's moved on to Greece for a nominal fee. Brno Poikin have actually brought in a Liverpool reserve goalkeeper as their on loan to replace him, Morozak. So interesting one to keep an eye on. He had a bit of a nightmare on his debut, but yeah, all in all, yeah, the window keeps moving. Steve, there's a lot of business going on.
I have to say, credit to Heerenveen. They've signed Danilo Arside from Sandefjord for 750,000 euros, and now Trensko as well. We think for even less than 1.5 million euros. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous value for them. Of course, they had Sarria as well, who's moved on to Lille now. They sold him for 8 million. So that feels like quite a well-run club to me, Heerenveen. If anyone is listening from Heerenveen, then well done to you. Maybe we do have some listeners from Heerenveen in no whatever way. So credit.
We did say on the last show about Sarria. I mentioned him on the last show, and I said he could be sold soon. And sounds like someone from the French league has picked him up. Was it Lyon or Lille?
Lille for 8 million euro. I think he'll go well there as well.
He's a good player. He's a good player.
He's very good.
We've talked about him a lot in the past years. But
yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me he'd do well there.
What was the fallout, by the way, from this Colin Rosler deal to Malmo? Was there a bit of controversy there, or?
There was a bit of controversy. So obviously we don't talk too much about the inner workings of transfers behind the scenes, Steve. I know last pod you talked about maybe doing a scouting podcast. Now you might want to maybe do an agent podcast, because this one blew up between Jim Solbakken, who is a notorious agent in Norway for different reasons. A lot's been written about him, so I won't go into it, reasons why, obviously, but he's a famous agent who's done a lot of deals. He's represented a lot of big name players in Norway. I think he was part of the Odio Ngallo to Manchester United deal, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But he's a well-known agent, Steve, and a massive fallout took place between him and Mjällby sporting director, who came out afterwards and said, I will never, both of them came out essentially and said, I'll never deal. Solbakken said, no player of mine will ever deal with Mjällby again. So he's put Mjällby on the blacklist. They're never doing business with any of his clients ever again. And likewise, the sporting director of Mjällby came out and said, I want no dealings with this man at all. The rumor was, Steve, essentially when Rosler moved to Mjällby, apparently there was a fallout over the agreed release clause when he was to be moved on. And so, of course, maybe there's been some different stories. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but essentially it went very public. Both agent and sporting director came out publicly and traded a bit of a blow for blow war of words there that came out. Just some of the sort of the quotes that were, well, Rosler decided not to get involved. He said, listen, Solbakken's been my agent for many years and it's between them. But that isn't exactly, it was a bit of a less dignified fallout between the two people in charge. It just gives you a bit of an inner workings of behind the scenes of these transfers, Steve. You know, a lot goes on, and you know sometimes it can get a bit tasty behind the scenes. But yeah, both manager and both agents and sporting director kind of stuck by their corner. Aftonbladet reported essentially that Hasse Larsson, Mjällby sporting director, said he has lied about everything from the start to the end, whereas Solbakken described Hasse Larsson as Sweden's biggest ostrich. Now, I don't know if Google Translate maybe might be getting that one a bit wrong, but essentially there's an accusation that they broke the agreement. This is what was said. This is what Solbakken said. They broke the agreement that we had. What pisses me off even more is how they treated Colin, and he ended up getting in trouble, even though he's the nicest guy in the world. Hasse Larsson is Sweden's biggest ostrich. He stuck his head in the sand and didn't answer the phone for me to a week. This transfer nearly broke down several times, and it was put to Larsson what he has to say about that. Obviously, Mjällby have been very good, Steve, haven't they, this season? But they are getting picked off now. They've lost Stoll to Djurgården. They've lost Rosler now in their defence to Malmo. And of course, that might affect them because their defence is such a important part of their game, really, isn't it? As we've talked about and had Anders Torstensson on the show. Larsson's done some wheeling and dealing and made some quite good money for Mjällby over the past year or so. But he says, I can say he is the type of agent we will never talk to again. He has lied about everything from start to finish. So there you go, Steve. A bit of a fallout there. But essentially, Rossler did get his big move to Malmö.
Yeah, and like you say, Mjällby have had a great season, but they've now not lost their last 3 games. Tough matches away from home, I might add. And they're losing players. This is what happens when you start to get some sort of success. It's really hard to keep your players in that. So they've dropped out of 4th place in that table. Do we have a title race here, Jonathan? I mean, you're going on a 6 adrift. They've got a game in hand. I mean, win that and it's game on. But I mean, Malmö, they often do drop random points around this time of year. It seems to happen to them when they're in like European matches and stuff. But some might say they can afford to do it. Djurgården haven't been without issues either. They drop points against Kalmar, drop points against IFK, Göteborg. I mean, I just sense from what I've been watching of the games that Malmö eventually could well pull clear again. But I suppose there may well be a genuine title race again.
I don't think we have a title race, but I think we have more of a title race than we've had at any point of the season. Where anyone who listens to this podcast regularly, Steve, you might recall us about 3 weeks or 4 weeks into the season saying that Malmö are going to win this by 15 points or so. My preseason prediction of them to walk the league pretty much. They did do that at the start of the season, but they have tailed off a little bit now. Obviously, the gap is down to 6 points. Djurgården have a game in hand as well, so if they win that game in hand, it's 3 points. But they have wobbled, as you did mention there. They lost to Kalmar, which is I think a really poor result. They also drew with IFK at home, which is a game really they should be winning if they've got aspirations of the title, in my opinion. Part of it is the rotation of the squad, Steve. They have got nearly a completely new defence, really. They've got 2 new fullbacks in Stahl and Berg, who played in their most recent game. There's rumours Zetterstrom, Coventry City have sort of been strongly linked with him, the goalkeeper at Djurgården. They've got Aslan's come in. Obviously, they've lost Bergvall to Spurs, who's looked quite good, apparently, according to people in pre-season, at Tottenham, who, an exciting player. It looks like now there's rumours even this evening coming out, Steve, in Sweden, saying that Samuel Leach-Holm, who they've only just recently signed, there's a lot of rumours now saying he's off to Häcken. They only signed him in January. So they are wheeling and dealing Djurgården quite a lot. They've also brought in a lad called Priska from Midtjylland. So I still think up front they're a little bit short. Dennis Hummit is the man they're sort of relying on maybe to fire them to the title. I think they've lost some fairly important players, in Dahl as well. Dahl was a quality player, in my opinion. So I'm not sure about them. But one thing about Malmö, Steve, we have to say is they are wobbling. And there's been big accusations around the manager, Henrik Meister, and of course, just the size of the squad. Malmö kind of remind me a little bit of me on Football Manager sometimes, where you just can't say no to certain talents and you just sign them. And then you end up with a squad sometimes. And I remember when I used to play Football Manager, there were some times where I would just rotate the whole team just for the sake of it, because I'd say, well, I like this young player. I've not given him a game yet. I signed him for the sake of it. And he's doing well in the reserves. Let's bring him in and just rotate the side every single week, and you have no stability. And I'm getting a bit of a feeling about that with Malmö at this moment in time, Steve. Just you cannot predict their lineup. He can change formation at any point. It's very hard, obviously, for fantasy players to get a sense of what they're going to do. For example, Bollin's come in recently and looked quite good. For example, Hugo Bollin, a 21-year-old. You've got Oliver Berg, who's kind of hit and miss. Taha Ali, he's in, he's out, doing a hokey-cokey. Botheim, they've got Kiesa Tellin up front. They've got so many options. Zetterstrom is a young 19-year-old who's been at centre-back recently for them. But they've just got so many options, Steve, that I think that they've started to wobble partly on that, or maybe because they're focused on Europe as well. And it's not helping them. So they have wobbled Malmö, and it has opened the door a little bit for Djurgården and maybe Hammarby to sort of sneak in.
Yeah, it's like Football Manager. You need 2 11s, don't you, that you can rotate in and out. I do feel like their focus is on Champions League. They really want to try and get... I mean, even to actually qualify for Europa League wouldn't be terrible for them based on recent years. And in terms of fantasy, I saw suggestions that you got to lock in these fantasy assets. I think they had Halmstad at the weekend. I was never interested. I know you knew the lineup before the deadline, But at this stage, they just want to go there and get the win, and they did 1-0. Whilst they're involved in Europe and qualifying for Europe, especially, I wouldn't go near any of their players, to be honest, because you don't even know who's going to play. There's three interesting teams, I think, kind of chasing. Hammarby, Elfsborg, Häcken as well, I think, need to be mentioned, who are probably playing as good a football as anyone in the league right now. In the case of Elfsborg, got a new manager. I know they've caught your eye. They caught my eye in Europe. So they may well be the teams that are kind of battling for the bronze medal or even a silver medal, potentially.
Well, can I just start by saying that the one thing with regards to Malmo, in my opinion, that's key to this title race is Nanasi. Because although we haven't mentioned him in that transfer rumor, there's been strong links to Saint-Etienne in France. I think the most recent report suggested that is not going to go through. But I think there's a very strong chance that by the end of this window, Steve, Nanasi won't be playing in Sweden anymore. It seems like the feelers are out for him, and once that gravy train starts, the rumor mill starts getting into gear, it often spells the end of the time there. I'd be very surprised if he sees out the full season. And if he leaves, Steve, when you actually look through that Malmo side, it's hard to look at a talisman. Maybe Botheim or Keith Tellin, but them two aside, it's actually hard to pinpoint, in my opinion, a talisman you say, right, this guy's going to win in the league, Nanasi aside. So, yeah, that's keep an eye on that, because I think that could be very determinant, unless obviously Malmo go out and maybe sign some players to replace Nanasi, but then that takes you back to the original dilemma of too big a squad. So, yeah, it's not a done and dusted title at the moment. So that's an interesting one. On the teams that you mentioned there, Djurgården, I think, are the strongest in terms of maybe challenging, but I'm still, like I say, not convinced by certain players. Vikheim, Hummer, Gullikson has had a pretty good season, but all in all, can they sort of fire them to the title? I'm not necessarily convinced. Hammarby have really impressed me, but we talk on this pod, Steve. We're recording just after the Brummer-Poikina 3-3 game. I can't believe they've thrown 2 points there away. For me, they have one of the top three coaches in the division, and I'm getting a real sense of a team there in Hammarby that I think, if they stay on the right track and keep their noses out of sort of their constant wheeler dealing that they do, buying and selling players as they like to do, I think we're looking at Hammarby side that could be here to stay over the next 2-3 seasons, maybe, in terms of maybe potentially challenging for the title. They have a really good game model. They look at times they look brilliant. It's just that their defense lets them down a little bit at times. They were really weak today against Brummer-Poikina once they went 3-1 up defensively. Some of the goals were shocking. And I think that's a big 2 points drop, because I really felt that if they'd won that, they'd started to put themselves in the contention to maybe challenge or cement themselves in that top three, maybe, and really start to kick on. So I think that is psychologically a big blow, I believe. Brummer-Poikina, I know they've had quite a good season. They're quite high in the XG ranks and stuff like that. Brummer-Poikina are quite a tricky side. They're hard to predict, and they do give they can give teams a bit of a punch in the face. But I think if you've got aspirations to challenge for the title, Hammarby, there was 22,000 attendance there today. I feel like that was they needed to win that game. Häcken as well, they're having an okay season. I have to be honest, Häcken, I've kind of slept on them a little bit this season. They haven't really appealed to me. I've kind of taken a back seat on them this year, whereas in previous years I've been so high on them. They feel to me in a bit of a transition season, and maybe it's starting to just click a little bit now. Europe is a focus as well. If they can get into the Europe, and maybe that could be a big thing for them. They had some really memorable games last season. For example, the Aberdeen games, which were really fun to watch. The new manager's sort of doing okay. They've got some good talents there as well that are coming and emerging. The squad is regenerating a little bit. The Benny Traorés, of course, have gone. Players like that, Sadiq, of course, but players like Romeo are still there, Launi are still there, kind of impacting. And then they've got players who are coming in like Anusa, Agbonifo, other players like that who are sort of coming into the team and regenerating them slightly. But for me, the jury is still out a little bit on Häcken. I like, at the moment, Steve, I like Hammarby. I really like what Elfsborg are doing. I think Hildemark, I know you've commented on his good looks, but he's also shown some glimpses of being, a decent manager, to be fair, because he changed the formation there. He changed the setup a little bit. They've gone to kind of maybe a false nine system. Abdullah's come in a little bit more often as well. So sometimes they go with a target man. Sometimes they play a false nine or a 3-4-3. He's very versatile in terms of squad selection. It's a bit like Malmo, maybe hard to predict who will play. They've got the Zanellis. Obviously, they've got Karsem as well at times. Obviously, as we said, Steve, with Europe, maybe they're having to rotate their squad a little bit as well, because they have had several games in Europe over the last 3-4 weeks. But yeah, I think they're doing well as well. The crazy thing for me, Steve, before we wrap up on this and move on maybe to part 2, when you just look at, we talk about those teams, but when you actually look at the expected goals, Steve, according to our partners, Wyscout, you've got Malmo who are miles clear expected goals, 43.12 goals XG. Can you name me the second, third, and fourth teams on XG prediction?
Well, I can tell you now, I bet Västerås is second.
Correct.
We're going to have like a complete special hour dedicated to Västerås at some point, by the way. They are like a unique case. They're like a case study. Absolutely remarkable. After that, I reckon teams like maybe Sirius are up there in the top 5. I think they do create a lot of chances. And then I would have to go someone like probably Häcken, because they are wild.
2 out of 3 there, and I have to commend you on your efforts, because the point I'm making it is that we're talking about the title contenders. There's no Häcken in that. There's no Elfsborg. There's no Djurgården. Hammarby not even close. They're 5th bottom of the league in XG, 22 expected goals versus 30 scored according to Wyscout, 22.13. They're 5th bottom. So the top 4 in the league for expected goals is actually Sirius 4th, Bromma Poikina in 3rd, and Western, as you mentioned there, 2nd XG in the league, and yet they're rock bottom. 32.54 XG versus 14 scored, which is unbelievable, to be honest. So it tells you that this title race is, it's a curious one, really, isn't it? Teams aren't really firing on all cylinders. Häcken are 5th on that list, by the way. In terms of defenses, Malmo again dominate. Their expected goals against 16.23, best in the league. That's when we start to see the teams that we're talking about at the moment. Djurgården 2nd, Hammarby 3rd, Elfsborg 4th, Mjällby 5th. So that's where these teams are kind of getting into the title contention. It's the fact that they've got sturdier, maybe defenses. And Häcken, of course, when we come to that, Häcken are 5th bottom of the league for expected goals against. And
they've got individual quality actually who finish chances as well. It must be said. There's something for the technical ability that these top teams do have, where Västerås, goodness me, no one can finish their dinner, can they? Just before we finish this section, I think probably the next episode we'll talk more about the relegation battle. But Kalmar, I do know we've got at least one very regular Kalmar listener to this pod, probably a few others as well. Just kind of talking off air that you're a bit worried about them, Jonathan, especially now Transco's gone. Could this be a year where they actually get relegated?
They're in massive trouble. And talking about a friend, I do hope everything is all right with our good friend Oscar Wasson, because I did tweet him after this game and say, what's happening? I don't know if he's seen the tweet or maybe I've missed the reply, but I did send a little cheeky tweet to see what his thoughts are about this Kalmar side. And I don't believe he's replied yet, but maybe you haven't checked the mentions. X these days, Steve, you can't find your dinner, let alone find someone tweeting you. It's turned into an absolute mess. That's that app. But let me not get started on that. I think Kalmar are in huge trouble. I really worry for them, and I think it's fair to say, Steve, we have a soft spot for them on this podcast.
Oh yeah, of course.
We've got a lot of listeners from there who have been really kind to us over the years of this pod, and they do like us to talk about them sometimes. And we've had fond years with like the Rydström years when they were so interesting to watch. The Brazilian years, Steve, when they had all these random players like Rooney and other sort of random Brazilians. They've always been the team we've enjoyed sort of keeping an eye on. I'm very worried about their Allsvenskan future, because they're currently 15th. They've lost 3 on the bounce. Manager has gone, obviously. They've had fights. They've had fallout behind the scenes. They've got Dino Aslamovic up front, Steve, who just... they've got a sort of his receding hairline, and he's just aging a bit, and he went down with Östersunds, didn't he, at one point, and he's just never worked for him at Rosenborg. Is he a sort of totem of doom? They're 3 points off Värnamo, who are in a relegation playoff. EFK are 13th. I can't really see EFK getting relegated. They're always sort of flirting with it, but I'm just looking at the league and thinking, Steve, who are Kalmar going to get out of? Because Norrköping have completely turned their season around with some of the results they've had.
Halmstad are poor. I must say Halmstad are quite poor in that they're struggling. But let's be real. If Västerås had took just some of their chances, Kalmar would be rock bottom right now, which is obviously
Halmstad. I mean, we can talk about them on another week, but I kind of agree with you. But my point is with Norrköping, they've opened up a 7-point gap now to Kalmar.
Remarkable turn of form.
They both had a massive, they had that massive game a few weeks back where Norrköping beat them 2-0, Kalmar.
Mm.
And to me, that was a huge game in this relegation battle. You know, Norrköping have now gone 4 games and 4 straight wins, basically. Kalmar are going to need to do something similar because losing Trensko as well is just catastrophic, really. Their best player of the season for me by miles. They've now got, apart from the Swedish Cup games coming up, they've now got Västerås away, Steve, this week, and that is enormous. Absolutely enormous. They cannot lose that game, in my opinion. Then they've got Malmo at home, Gais away, Värnamo at home, which is another huge game. And then we're getting to like the last 4, 5, 6, 7 games of the season. They've still got Halmstad away to come. They've still got to go to Djurgården. They've still got to go to EF Core. I'm just not sure. They're going to need to do some business, Steve, to replace Trensko. Because
I've never known a Kalmar side so poor defensively in all my time covering Nordic football podcasts. Because normally they at least have always had some sort of defensive feel of rigidity about them. But it's the worst defense I've ever known of Kalmar in my time watching them. I don't know what. It just seems to go against their DNA. It must be really worrying for supporters, you know, in that respect. Troubling times for Kalmar. Let's see how this relegation battle unfolds. And that brings us to the end of part 1 of this episode. We'll be back to talk more about the Eliteserien and goings on there. So join us after the break. Thanks very much for your time so far.
Welcome to part 2 of this episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. We've talked about Europe. We've talked about Sweden. Let's move on to Norway now. I've got here written down, Steve, in terms of your notes, loads of points dropped at the top of the table. So doesn't necessarily talk about a team that we should speak on and focus on first. So I'll run through the results and then, you know, you can take your pick essentially. So most recent games, Friday, 9th of August, we had Sandefjord 2, Godset 2. For those of you of a Godset flavour, don't forget we had Jürgen Isnes on the podcast a few episodes back. Don't forget to go back and listen to that if you would like. Of course, that was an interesting little interview when I was in Drammen. We then had Haugesund 0, HamKam 1. Tom Dent and his side there getting a nice result. The assistant manager, of course, and friend of the podcast, winning away to Haugesund. Viking 1, Glimt 1. We then had on Sunday, Steve, we had K from Oslo 1, Rosenborg 0. Rosenborg losing again to the newly promoted side in that Oslo Derby. No, not Oslo Derby, we want to talk about, sorry. Rosenborg losing again to an Oslo team. Odd 1, Sarpsborg 1. And then we had Lillestrøm 1, Molde 2. In terms of the table, Steve, that leaves it looking, you know, Glimt are quite clear. They've got an 8-point lead at the top, although Viking have a game in hand in second place, 33 points to Viking, 18 played, 41 points for Glimt, 19 played. We've then got Brann in third on goal difference, 33 points plus 6 goal difference, just level with Viking, but lesser goal difference. Molde in fourth, 31 points, 18 games played. Then we've got Fredrikstad and K from Oslo to round out the top 6, which is really interesting, the promoted side, Steve. And down the bottom, we've got Haugesund, rock bottom at the moment, 17 points from 17 games. Sandefjord, 17 points from 18 games. So Haugesund have a game in hand, and Odd in the relegation playoff, 18 points from 18 games. Tromsø just above them with a goal difference, slightly better goal difference. And we've got Rosenborg in 10th, Steve, at the moment, currently just 3 points above relegation. And we do have a question from a listener. We don't have to talk about it right now, but I will ask it later, Steve. It's about Rosenborg. Could they potentially sleepwalk into relegation? That's from @Spongy. But Steve, take it away. You've written here loads of points dropped. Take it away where you want to go with it.
Well, I said loads of points dropped at the top end of the table. Loads of points dropped everywhere. Just looking at the actual last 5 games form guide in Eliteserien now, there's not a single team that's won their last 2 consecutive games. Not a single team. And in the last 5 games, only 2 teams have managed to actually string together 2 straight wins at any time. And those are actually Sandefjord and K from Oslo. So this is a very strange period. It's a strange season, full stop. I think the episodes we've had this year have kind of suggested this might happen, but it's a really tight year. The gap between top and bottom has significantly reduced, which means we're getting a scenario where anyone can kind of beat anyone. We're getting a lot of draws this year. And the standard, I think it's because the standard's gone up. It doesn't mean the standard's gone down. It's because the quality level's gone up in terms of the players on show, in terms of the managers. All the teams that qualify for Europe are doing well. And also, there's been a lot of sort of postponed games as well, by the way. Teams not in action because of these European fixtures. The deeper they get, all these teams have a right to postpone a game now if they want it, if they keep going deep in these qualifying rounds. Norway really looks after its coefficient in the last few years, and it's paid dividends with the results in Europe in probably the last 4 or 5 years now. Bode Glimt are top of the table by 8-point margin. There's games in hand below them, but I think it's one of them years that I think Glimt will go on to win the league. But we might look back at the end of it, and a few teams might have some regrets, thinking this was a year that they were actually vulnerable domestically, but no one really could challenge them consistently enough.
Glimt obviously doing very well. You mentioned in part one about the European focus. Do you see them getting distracted at all? Is the squad just simply too good to, even if they did take their eye off the ball, maybe a little bit with Europe, to get distracted and maybe start to get chipped away out by teams who are the sort of chasing pack? I mean, I mentioned there in Sweden, Djurgården have that game in hand. Viking also have that game in hand. If they won that, it's 5 points. And obviously Brann as well are similar. Molde, if they won their game in hand, obviously that goes to sort of 7 points, which is maybe too far. But yeah, my question is, have Viking wrapped up? Has Glimt wrapped it up already, or is there sort of maybe potential for them to get distracted?
Of course they can get distracted, but now they've only got 2 more games left before the next international window. They play Sarpsborg on the 24th of August and Godset on the 1st of September. If they go deep in and end up facing Red Star, they could request the postponement of the Sarpsborg game if they want it. So they can afford to focus on Champions League now for the rest of this period and not even drop points in the league. But look, they're going to end up qualifying for some sort of European competition, whatever. So the opportunity, I've always said they're a bit vulnerable after European games in recent years. And yeah, I don't think they're going to run away with a ridiculous points total. Something like 60 to 65 points, I think, is going to win Eliteserien this year, which would be one of the lowest totals in recent years. The question is, can anyone below mount a consistent title challenge? And Brann and Molde could end up in Europe as well, so it's going to be difficult for them. Viking are not in Europe, so that's an advantage for them. But do they have? I don't think Viking have such a good squad as last year, which is a shame for them. So yeah, I think it's kind of by default, really, Glimt, and they're still very good, of course, and they're still probably going to be able to bring in players before the end of the window as well to reinforce. It should be Glimt by default, really. I just don't see anyone below getting on a run of even. No one looks like winning 2 games or 3 games in a row right now in Eliteserien. That's how tough it is. This has become a rock-hard division, mate.
A major thing that we talked about in part one is transfers. And I get the sense that, you maybe aren't decided on teams who have the squad capable of challenging Glimt. Is that impacted by the transfer window? And, have some of those teams lost or gained maybe some transfers that could potentially help turn things in their favor or maybe hinder them? Where's your head at with transfers around teams like the likes of Viking, Molde? Maybe reinforcements they might need or players they might lose. How's that dynamic going to influence the title race?
Well, Glimt have obviously lost a massive player in this window, and in Albert Grombeck, who was sold for 15 million euros to Rennes. And no team's ever safe from losing their top talents in the Eliteserien. Of course they're not. But Glimt have brought in this week they brought Sondre Auckland in from Viking, who is their nearest title rivals. So what they can do now, they can hoover up. It's a bit like what Bayern Munich used to do. Just hoover up the best sort of talents domestically from their rivals. And it's a bit of a ruthless thing. They started to do it at the start of the year, even with a manager becoming their assistant. Looking down through the minute, there is more income actually, and this league gets more money for players than Allsvenskan now. Probably, is it that because of the coefficient? Is that because, the standard of players a little bit better overall? Brann are an interesting side. I think they would, if I had to pick one team that could maybe go on a run, it would be them because they did it last year, and they have had more of a settled transfer window so far. But for me, I just worry with Brann's squad depth a little bit. But look, no club's invulnerable to losing players. Let's see at the end of this window where everyone stands. I think then I can give a better estimation of where everyone's going to finish. I think, Jonathan, it'll be a nervous few weeks for some clubs for sure.
Just taking a look at kind of some of the recent transfers, Steve. We've had Glimpse have picked up a few. For example, Gift Sunday, I believe, is one. He's joined in August. Don't know if you know too much about him. From Nigeria. Viking as well. They've signed Sondre Auckland. There's been other teams getting involved. I've seen HamKam have made a signing from Denmark, for example, Anton Ekeroth. What's your perspective on sort of key transfers maybe that you've seen so far? Even I've seen Mulder have signed a player. How do you feel about transfers so far, Steve, from that point of view?
I think there's been some really interesting ones. I mean, Mulder just this week signed a player from Landskrona in Sweden, the second tier there, Fredrik Ihler. They needed a striker, by the way, and they've got one now. But, you know, they forked out nearly €1 million for him, which feels quite a lot for someone from the second tier of Sweden. These clubs have money. You know, Mulder and Buda Glimt have got money from European runs in recent years, which is a massive thing to mention. But I do quite like some of the dealings that other clubs have been doing as well. You know, even HamKam, like you said, have brought in 3 very interesting players this window. Ekeroth, Mohamedov Kir's come in, Vålerenga on loan. And you look down through the whole league and I feel like a lot of clubs are making some very, very smart signings, mate. This league now is becoming a hotbed for talent, and they're making the right transfers. And that's why I think the league's kind of tightened up a bit. Look at the difference between top and bottom of the league now compared to 3 years ago. It's nowhere near as much. And
you mean in terms of points? You mean in terms of points gap or
quality? Yeah, quality and points gap. That's what happens. It's like a knock-on effect. Like the relegation battle now, you could pick anyone. Someone's asked a question about could Rosenborg sleepwalk their way into relegation. I think anyone 7th and below could get sucked into relegation if they're not careful. I don't think Rosenborg will go down. I think their home form's too strong. But I mean, it's really hard to pick the bottom 3 at this point in time. Haugesund, I said, did I say at the start of the season this could be the year they go down? Maybe I'm going to be proven right just by default, because I did say going into the season that it doesn't look like an obvious, really weak team, and I think I've been proven right so far. There's not a genuine easy fixture in Eliteserien right now that you could say, right, that is a fixture they're going to batter them. I mean, even Haugesund against Buda Glimt recently put up a very good fight and only lost 4-2, and they led 2-1 in that game. So it just proves that that's how much of a tough effort the top team is to beat the bottom team right now.
Well, you did pretty well in part 1 when I asked you about expected goals, according to our partners, Wyscout, Steve. Give a shout out to our partners there. Data providers always supporting us. I've got one for you now on Norway. In your opinion, who is top of the expected goals in Norway?
Well, I think I know Buda Glimt are top of expected goals for and the best for expected goals against. After that, you might have me, actually, because I am not sure. I would probably guess Brann as the second team because they normally create a lot of chances. And if you're rounding off a top 3, I think you're looking at someone like... this is a trick question, isn't it? It should be Mulder, but I'm going to go someone like Sarpsborg.
Well, you're wrong, so I'm going to interrupt you anyway, because I'll give you a half point because you've correctly identified Brann. However, according to our partners, Wyscout, Brann are top of the expected goals in this league. They are above Buda Glimt. And also, Steve, Mulder are the top of the league for expected goals against and not Glimt.
Oh, that's changed in the last round then.
That might well have changed. Mulder 15.12 expected goals against to 21 conceded. Glimt 19.36 XG against to 17 conceded. But the interesting part of that there is, and where I wanted to take this question for you, Steve, was Brann 37.24 expected goals to 28 scored versus Buda Glimt 36.81. So it's very marginal with 42 scored. And Mulder do wrap up the top 3. They're third in terms of expected goals.
That's a big underachievement for Brann, isn't it?
That is an underachievement. That's my point. When it comes to transfers, are we looking at maybe Brann as the outright potential challenges if they could just sort out putting the ball in the net a bit more from the chances they create?
I think some teams have figured out Bran a bit though, right? Bran only play one way. They have a plan A, but they don't have anything after that. There's no plan B, no plan C. And I think teams are just kind of letting them blow themselves out, if you know what I mean. They're going to come at you really hard, certainly for the first 45 minutes. And Bran just have a knack of kind of wasting opportunities. They're almost too frantic. They're playing their pace. We talk about Football Manager, right? If you were managing Bran, I would set the intensity down to just a slightly lower pace, lower tempo. Sorry, I think it is now. They're just playing the game too quick, and I think that is sometimes why they miss so many chances or are missing the final right decision. And I think teams are quite happy for them to let them burn themselves out a bit, and then inevitably at some point in the second half they're a bit tired. There's a moment, a 5-10 minute stretch where they're not quite on it, and teams are kind of taking advantage of that. And also on set pieces, I think they've been a little bit vulnerable. So Bran are a great watch, but they're very predictable how they play. They do play lovely football, and they can beat anyone on their day. But there's no real backup plan. Versatility in that way. And I think teams have I'm not saying they've figured them out, but they kind of know what's going to happen in a Bran game. And they have missed chances. I think I'd like to know who exactly has been the biggest culprit for that, because I reckon it's just a team effort. I think the whole team has probably missed chances, even defenders from chances from set pieces and that. I'm guessing Bard Finner maybe
Bran don't have anyone in the top 8 goal scorers in the league. So if we're looking at the league top scorers, you've got Christian Eriksen on 9, Henrik Meister, who we'll maybe talk about slightly. You've got Johannes Hummelvoll Nunes from KFUM. You've got the likes of Biolo, Grunbeck, Saita, Trippic. You have to go all the way down to 6 goals, Steve, and Aonaseland Hegebo is Bran's top scorer in the league. Is that a case of maybe? So is this what to sum her up? Are they maybe lacking that forward, or are they just missing chances? I mean, I know up front they've got, for example, Bard Finner, we talked about a lot, but he's not having the season that he did last year, is he? It's 4 goals.
What is his expected goals? I'd like to know what Bard Finner's expected goals is, and also Hegebo's probably, because they must be underachieving. Nicholas Castro's come into the side this year, and he's another one who's wasted some opportunities a bit. Look, maybe they are lacking. And Mulder, by the way, have lacked a fit number 9 all year as well. This is the problem. Buda Glimt don't have a guaranteed number 9 either. Maybe that's kind of a theme of modern football a little bit as well, by the way. But that's why I did say that I think if any team can mount a charge, it probably is Bran, because we did it last year, and they do, on the eye, they outplay nearly every team every week. There's not many games where you come up, watch them, and you think, they've been outplayed there. It doesn't happen too often. Just
on that point, you do actually. It's quite an interesting one. We have Emil Kornvig, 7.95 xG, 2 goals scored for Bran, and Bard Finner, 7.25 xG, 4 goals scored. So you combine those two, and if they kind of increase their numbers even just slightly.
Kornvig.
Yeah.
He's a big culprit then, isn't he, for them?
3rd in the league XG.
But that wouldn't have actually noticed that, to be honest. But that's where you need the stats. I mean, Kornvig's he's sort of one of them attacking midfielders who kind of pops up everywhere. Come to think of it now, yes, I do remember a couple of misses, but that's a big underachievement, nearly 600 achievement for goals on one player. And we're only just into 17 games, 18 games. So
that's massive. Top of the league XG, by the way, is Lasse Nordas with 8.62 XG, 6 goals for Tromsø. They're the 22-year-old. So interesting stuff. Steve, let's move on. I think it sounds like maybe you think that Bran maybe could challenge if they could just sort out that a little bit.
Can I just mention Mulder? I mentioned this. I was thinking about this the other day when I was on one of my walks, and I was like, the next podcast, I've got to talk about Mulder, and I want to criticize the formation that they're using. I think Erling Moe now, and I've got a lot of respect for the manager, as we know down the years, I think he needs to move away from this system of a 3-5-2. In domestically anyway, I think, or at least be willing to change it up sometimes. I know it's very hard to move from like a back 3 to a back 4 and vice versa. But I just feel like, especially with the injuries that they've had, that they've been playing players out of position, square pegs in round holes, stuff like that. They've ended up with a bunch of centre backs, but there's no real like elite centre back. I honestly think 4-2-3-1 for Molde with inside fours would be far better than what they've been doing. I mean, it's like 3-1-4-2 now. And when he started to bring this system in, it was designed to basically beat off Buda Glimt, and it worked for a season. They won the title. But I just wonder now, I think it's time to revert back a bit sometimes. Although, to be fair to them, they did play a brilliant first half against Cercle Bruges in midweek. So I was like, maybe it would be a bit harsh. But I think Molde need to switch up their tactics a bit. Another team, maybe they've been found out a little bit. You keep playing the same thing for too long. Teams get clever tactical teams will work you out, Jonathan. It's just the way it is in sport.
Yeah, we've got a few talking points. Interesting one there, and it doesn't sound like you really think they can catch that 10-point gap to Glimt, even if they do have a game in hand. There's two areas I want to go with this now, Steve, before we wrap up the show. You've mentioned about the relegation battle, and you've kind of said that the gap is closing in terms of the overall strength of the league is improving. Is this reflected by the performances of Fredrikstad and KFUM there, Steve, in 5th and 6th? Talk to us about that and also the relegation battle. I mean, A, it sounds like these two teams are safe. B, let's hear a little bit about them, because obviously massive win for KFUM Oslo, for example, this season. We've not talked a huge amount about Fredrikstad either. And then if you want, you can tie it into the relegation battle and the teams that are struggling that we would maybe expected KFUM or Fredrikstad to maybe be amongst them.
I've got to tip my hat to all three promoted teams. Kristiansund as well, by the way. There's a lot of things going against logic here, right? I mean, Fredrikstad's case, I think everyone kind of fancied them to be a dark horse this year and have an okay season, but they've lost their manager to IK, Mikael Thomason, and I actually thought the boat would completely be rocked after that happened, but they've been really solid since then. I think they've not even lost a game since he's left the club. Maybe one game. Fredrikstad, fair play to them. KFUM Oslo, how on earth this squad is so high, I have no idea, but they genuinely deserve to be where they are from what I've seen on the field. I don't know what their metrics say, but it feels to me like they've not fluked anything. So basically that means that the players must be better than what I give them credit for. It's as simple as that. And we know the manager's been brilliant there as well. Kristiansund as well. They've not even been able to play at home because their actual home ground got torn apart by a storm, in June. So they've been playing their most recent home games at Molde's stadium nearby. I don't think they're actually able to go back to the home ground till September. But they've gone and won their last two home games on a neutral territory against Lillestrøm and Fredrikstad. So explain that. I mean, that could be seen as a disadvantage. So a lot of stuff kind of going against logic really this year, Jonathan, and the promoted sides are no stranger to that. I've got to tip my hat to them. It's very hard to work out why, but it's happened, doesn't it?
Let's get a shout out now for these two teams. Steve, give me maybe one or two words on the managers of KFUM and Fredrikstad, and also who do you think have been the key men, maybe key one or two players that have seen them do so well so far this season?
I mean, Johan Moisgaard, I mean, we talked about him in the pre-season podcast, and I think you were hanging your colours to him because he said some very motivating things, didn't he, about how they were going to take the teams have got to take them seriously, and I kind of didn't laugh them off, but I did say it would be very, very difficult for them. But he's lived up to his words. But Nunez, the top scorer, I think has been exceptional. He wasn't even, I don't think, fully fit the first few games, but he's been really clinical when they've needed him. One of the few clinical players in the league this year. And as for Fredrikstad, obviously Thomason, the manager, has now departed. There's an assistant that's taken over, Andreas Hagen. So he knows the club really well. Fredrikstad are more a defensive team. I think the goalkeeper's had a good season. Jonathan Fischer, I would say, has been a really key man for them. And in midfield, Morten Bjørlo, in addition to the left wing back, Stian Mulder, have probably been the best players.
Yeah, and a word on that manager, because there's been developments on him that we haven't talked about.
Yes, well, Mikael Thomason obviously left the club to IK. Have we not talked about this in an episode yet?
We haven't talked about this in an episode yet, I don't believe.
Yeah. Listen, I think he's a manager. I think he only lost something like 5 domestic games at Fredrikstad and he was also the manager in Faroe Islands KI in like 3.5 seasons. So, really good tactical manager. Knows, especially defense, knows how to set the team up defensively. Went to IE and like London bus syndrome, wasn't he? He lost his first 2 games, I think, to Gais, the same team. But recent result was a 1-0 win. That is Mikael Thomasson for you. He's going to rack up a lot of 1-0 wins at IE. There's going to be some 0-0s. There's going to be a lot of 1-1 draws, under 2.5 goals, well set up, disciplined side. And, I think that club, actually, IE is one of the teams in Sweden who will suit him, because their fans are quite happy to get an ugly win, aren't they? That's the way they kind of win titles. In the past.
1-0,
yeah.
When you said 1-0 win, I was thinking that's in their DNA.
Yeah.
It's like 1-0 to the Arsenal, 1-0 to the AIK.
Great fit. A good manager. A shame for Fredrikstad, but they seem more settled these days. Like the old Fredrikstad back in the day, it would have been a basket case, and they would have self-destructed already after losing someone like that. But it seems they've settled down. They're not going to go down. They're on 28 points. That's sure nearly enough already to stay up. So they're going to be all right. And let's see how this Andreas Hagen gets on. He's so far done a very good job. Fair play to him. Another, what is it about these in-club appointments that they seem to be the best way forward these days, actually, in Scandinavia?
Well, before we wrap up on Thomasson, is there any interesting quirks about him personality-wise? Because there were some things floating around for AIK fans about him on Twitter, saying he's a bit of a maverick character.
He's intense. I think he's very intense. I didn't follow him in Obos that much, but I've heard some things about his training sessions have left players very, very shocked at ICOR with the style and intensity of them. And we came in at Fredrikstad, and Fredrikstad, of course, were a team that were desperate to get back up. Always sort of probably a little bit mentally soft underbelly, couldn't get over the line, but he's just kind of instilled a discipline to them. Hard-nosed approach. It's basically my way or no way sort of thing. He is a bit quirky. He's a bit different. And that's why he's got the results down the years that he has. I think he goes beyond ICOR, personally. I think he goes into mainstream Europe, gets a big job somewhere in one of the top 5 leagues down the line. Now, he's not even that old, I don't think. He's not 50 yet. 48, is he? Off the top of my head? Something like that. He's getting to that perfect age for a manager, actually, where I am expecting a lot of big things, actually, at ICOR. If he keep him for long enough, they could even title challenge. That's
Mikael Thomasson, 48-year-old AIK manager. We may clip this, maybe put it on YouTube or something like that, because there's some interesting insight there, Steve. He's won titles galore, in fact. He's a Faroese manager. He's won the league 4 times in the Faroe Islands, at Klaksvik, 3 of them. He's also won the cup there, and he's won manager of the year at times and in other roles and things like that. So, yeah, it sounds like a manager on the up. AIK fans, maybe it could be the man to turn things around for you. Steve, 1 or 2 more things left before we wrap up this show. Transfer window. I know we briefly touched on it just now. Maybe you want to talk about 1 or 2 sort of big moves there. And then finally, some changes at Lillestrøm that might interest Manchester United fans.
I think a potential transfer we've got to mention is Henrik Meister, right, at Sarpsborg, a man who's been, has anyone been hotter in Europe in the last few weeks? I need to look up how many goals he scored recently. But he has been, a lot of scouts were at the last game against Odd at the weekend, I think, from some big clubs, likes of Nice, Salzburg, Werder Bremen were there, a Danish striker who's just been revolutionised since the new manager, Christian Mikkelsen's come in. He hasn't actually scored in his last 2 games, but 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 goals since the 21st of June in roughly 8 games. So, he scored 4 against Rosenborg in 1 game, of course. And it's a shame, isn't it, that he's finally found a bit of form here for Sarpsborg, and he probably will lose him before the end of the window. That just sums up Scandinavia, doesn't it? And they're going to have to find the next talent. But he's just developed massively. And that is there's talk of 8 million euros, by the way. Potentially up to 8 to 10 million euros. That would be huge for them. They did get 5 million euros for Christopher Bonsu-Bar last season. I don't even know what's happened to him. I've not followed his progress since he left, but Meister could be one of the big transfers. And I think catching the eye.
The rumor is, according to recent reports, Nordics Norvège, a great account to follow, French Norwegian football account, they've said that at the most recent game, at Meister's most recent game, representatives from Werder Bremen OGC Nice, Stade Rennes, Borussia Mönchengladbach, RB Salzburg, and Augsburg were all there to watch him. So that tells you a little bit about the interest. And you mentioned that the potential price tag, that would be huge. And we did say in our last episode about how these teams are starting to command a little bit more money now. Maybe that might impact the coefficients going forward, because more money, better players, more wages to be able to pay, potentially maybe get better results. Maybe we might start to see more of these teams do well in Europe and against counterparts from the likes of Belgium, the Netherlands, and other leagues, Poland, etc. But yeah, big player to keep an eye on there, Henrik Meister.
Yeah, definitely. And then on to Lillestrøm. And actually, Lillestrøm have got to be careful, you know. Now, this time last year, at the end of last season, they were absolutely laughing, weren't they? Their big rivals, Vålerenga, went down. We saw the famous tifo for the manager in the derby game. But they are only 2 points clear of the drop. Now, Vålerenga, by the way, are 7 points clear of the automatic promotion spots in OBOS. It looks very likely they're going to come straight back up, as you'd expect. But Lillestrøm have had a big manager problem in the recent years, you know. They just can't seem to keep their man for long enough. Andreas Jorgensen came in at the start of the season. I wouldn't say he did particularly great job with him. He did an okay job. They did score some goals from set pieces, you might hope. They conceded some as well. But he's gone to Manchester United as the set piece coach. Big move for him. You know, he was previously, I think, at Arsenal, wasn't he, as a set-piece coach back in the day? Former Malmo coach as well. And Robin Asterhead, a former pod guest, has taken over. Was the assistant, and now he's going to be the caretaker until the end of the season, I do believe. So they're just, I don't know, Lillestrøm. They just feel like a little bit of a mess, actually, the last couple of years in terms of the direction they're going in. I think it's a big loss in terms of stability. I think a whole season under Jorgensen, they probably would finish about 8th or 9th, maybe even a tad higher, and now they've got to reset and go again. As far as Jorgensen's concerned, obviously the love of Manchester United was just too much.
Yeah, not much stability there, is it? He left fairly sharpish in terms of his role. Was he doing a good job? He's a very versatile coach, really. He's known for his set pieces, Jorgensen. He's obviously coached Malmo. Was a sort of interim manager there for a while, sporting director roles as well. You know, he's a man who wears many hats in terms of he can play administrative roles as well as coaching, as well as managing. What was the perception of him leaving Lillestrøm? Is it kind of, will they miss him? Was it kind of too quick to make an impact? How was he doing?
I think he was doing okay. They've very much been an all or nothing team this year. Just 2 draws, lowest amount of draws of any team in the league, apart from Haugesund, the same number. Strangely poor home record. Lillestrøm down the years usually really strong at home on the grass surface. Seem to perform better away from home for whatever reason. I think he'd have been all right. Give him a whole season, I think it would have been mid-table. Probably maybe 7th, highest, something like that. The potential perception, I don't think it's not been seen as a big loss. Obviously, they weren't doing amazing or anything. It's just this instability at Lillestrøm. They've got to be careful. This is the sort of year where a reputable club could go down because it's close. And Lillestrøm, I'd be a little bit nervous if I was them, especially after what happened last season. He who laughs loudest.
Well, that would be a hell of a plot twist in that whole brouhaha, wouldn't it? If they
really would.
Drop. Yeah, they're not out of it. Let's be fair. 20 points, 17 played. They got a game in hand, but they're only 3 points above the automatic relegation, with a worse goal difference than Sandefjord.
They spent some money, Lillestrøm, this window, by the way. They spent 800k on Kevin Krygard from Casapia, former Haugesund player. They've spent €500,000 on Marcus Karlsbach from Allsvenskan, and they brought in Felix Var from Djurgården. I think that was a permanent after a loan. So, yeah, they have spent some dough as well in this window. They've lost a youngster called Daniel Skarrud to Ajax for over $1 million. I never saw him play. I don't think he even played a minute for the club. 16-year-old. Ajax hoovered him up, so they managed to get $1 million back. But they've got to watch themselves. I mean, Asterhead was the former manager at Varnamo, right? Was it Varnamo? Somewhere like that.
Yeah, Varnamo. Yeah, we've had him on the podcast.
I mean,
as well.
Yeah, he came across. I think he's a decent manager, so I think he'll be all right. But it's never easy, is it, taking over at the time he's done it? And he's got to get a couple of wins soon, just to settle things down again, Jonathan.
Okay, if you've got no further comments on any more transfers, that will wrap it up for this week of the Nordic Football Podcast. Thank you so much to everyone who's liked and commented and shared, obviously on YouTube, Patreon. We really appreciate your support as always, and subscribing to the pod. Don't forget you can catch us on Twitter or X at Nordic Footpod. You can also find us on YouTube, Nordic Football Podcast. Subscribe there to get your episodes directly to you, or patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast if you would like to contribute and help us out with the running costs, etc. of the show and just our general well-being. I know this season's been ups and downs in terms of maybe regularity of content, but I think I have to take a lot of the responsibility for that, just for certain personal circumstances. But we do always appreciate your support, and I hope we still give you some value. And as I say, we always do value our listeners. So thanks a lot for everything this week. Be in touch. Let's see how the European games get on, and we'll be back to look ahead to the sort of last 10, 12 games of the season very soon on this show. Take care of yourselves. Thank you, Steve, for your contribution.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been great to do the episode with you again. And thanks to all the loyal listeners. We've not had as many episodes this year as we would have liked. Hopefully we can finish 2024 in a good way. But as always, watch this space. Enjoy your football. Enjoy August. It's a mad month of football. And we'll see you next time, Jonathan. Take care, everyone. Stay safe and goodbye.